So just like good design is about process, I think good testing is also about process as well. And I think it's about getting the best possible feedback for the stage you're in. Many people think, like I did in the beginning, that the most efficient way of getting feedback was through unmoderated testing. But after having tried that, what I've found is actually that moderated testing is more efficient in the long run. And when I say unmoderated testing, I'm referring to having a participant try to perform a predetermined set of tasks and answer questions on their own without somebody present. And moderated testing is the same thing, but with somebody there guiding them through the tasks and questions in real time. So now going into unmoderated versus moderated testing. So what I found with unmoderated testing is that it's really time consuming to put it all together. And so I've had to spend a lot of time thinking of the right questions and the right tasks, making sure they're both worded very clearly and in a way that will get us the kind of feedback that we're looking for. Then it also takes time to create mock-ups that will match those questions and tasks specifically. I can't tell you how many times we said, pretend you're Sue and you're trying to make a donation, and actually in the mock-up it says they're Mark, and then people get confused. So it definitely takes a lot of time to make sure you get everything right. And I would say included in the setup time is pre-testing and trying to avoid having people get confused by the questions, but that's also added in the time for setup. And why we have to spend so much time on it is because it's not something that you can change once you release it. Once you send out the test, you can't really change the questions if you find that actually one of them is confusing, or that people aren't getting it, or that a question isn't useful. And so what that means is in the end, it can be hit or miss. And it might take multiple iterations of the same unmoderated test to get the kind of feedback that you're looking for. Okay, so but for moderated testing, what I found one of the big benefits is that it's flexible. So that means you don't have to spend as much time making sure you get the questions and tasks down perfectly the first time, because you can adjust. You can ask them in a different way if the participant doesn't get it. What that also means is that the mock-ups also don't have to be perfect. You can, if the participant gets thrown off by some artifact, you can correct that during the session, and you can spend therefore less time working on the mock-up and more time actually in the session. Also, if you find that a task isn't relevant or a question is no longer relevant, maybe you've gotten enough feedback on it, you don't have to include it anymore. So what I think that means is that you can basically make sure to get useful feedback in each of the sessions, even if it's not specifically what you were planning to get feedback on. And I've had this happen many times where maybe the prototype that I was going to test with isn't quite ready. And in that case, I'll just ask different questions. And I've actually found that it's a great way of involving people on other teams, like our marketing team, for example. I might say, hey, I have a donor coming in, but what we're going to test with, we don't really need to spend as much time on it. What are some other questions that you guys would like me to ask? Or what are some other ideas that you'd like me to throw out there and have them think about? So it's a great way of getting other people involved. And so I've therefore found that it's just more efficient. I can schedule sessions with people even before I'm sure exactly what I'm going to be testing, because I know that I'll be able to get I'll have something to test. So of course, moderated testing isn't the perfect solution for everyone. And what I think it depends on is having a way of getting participants in when you need them without putting in a lot of effort. And for us, that means using Valiantly, which we'll talk about a little bit more later on. It's also not good if you want to do a high volume of tests on the same feature, or you want to do the same test on a feature or a page over a long period of time. Now, for us, this isn't something that we do. We usually do a lot of testing on a specific page or a specific area because we're working on it, and then we actually don't come back to it again for a couple of months, at which point we might actually ask or want to ask different questions. But if you do want to continually test the same thing, then moderated testing isn't as good of a solution. And then the last bit is that you actually have to have somebody there with the participant during the entire session. It's not something that you can skip around. You can't simply watch recording skipping around to the parts that you like. And so that part does take up some time. Okay, so now I'd like to walk through two case studies, one in which we primarily use unmoderated testing to get feedback, and the other in which we use moderated testing. So for this first feature, we were getting feedback on a page that we were redesigning. It's a page that teachers will come to if they're interested in checking us out and they're thinking about registering on the site. So I'm going to walk you through just what the new version of the page looked like. So this is the top, and then in the middle, we explained how the site worked generally. We had some social proof, some numbers here. We then had a few project examples. And what we were hoping to find out was, would somebody who landed on this page basically understand the site, and would a teacher be interested in signing up? So our approach was to run a couple of unmoderated tests, and 7 in total. We asked questions like, how would you rate the trustworthiness of this? What would you want to know more about? And what would you click on? What would you do next? Total took 6 hours of prep time, and so this was making sure the mock-up matched the tasks, making sure the tasks were very clear, and the questions. Also doing the pre-testing and the analysis was all included in that time. So here's some examples of the responses that we got from that. So when we asked a question about what they remembered, we got very simple responses, something like the child smiling, and we're hoping to get more out of that, at least which child smiling, perhaps. And then when we asked about the trustworthiness rating, most people gave really high responses, and they commented on how clean it looked. Some people, which was helpful, and some people said that they had heard about the site already. And so if this were a moderated session, we could have said what based on this page might give you a clue as to how trustworthy this site might be. And we could have screened for that or asked them different questions if they had heard about the site. But with an unmoderated test, once they start, if you haven't screened them out before they start, before a participant starts, you can't really do that. And so we found that these questions yielded some interesting feedback that we did act on, but overall, many of the questions just actually weren't that useful for us. So what we ended up doing was we did make some changes, and then we just launched with those. We decided to rely on some of the analytics, like bounce rate through Google Analytics and looking at what people were clicking on, and then decided that we would actually do more testing, moderated this time, if we found that people weren't interacting with the page in the way that we wanted them to. So now for the second case study, which we primarily use moderated testing. So for this, we were revamping our homepage, and what we wanted to know was, would people basically get it, and what would they want to do if they landed on it? So our approach was to run a bunch of moderated sessions, and they're pretty open-ended, and for this, the prep time was pretty low, because again, we didn't need to have the questions perfectly laid out. We started with some general questions, and then we sort of took it from there based on what the participant wanted to do. And so now I'm actually going to switch to this version to show you guys how the first version looked first redesigned version. So we started by having some quotes from Stephen Colbert and Oprah. We had a video at the top. We then had a bunch of different sections of projects because our thinking was, let's see if we can get people hooked right away by exposing some of the projects that are available. We had a little bit about what the organization was and some of the numbers, some more projects, a way for a teacher to learn more to register if they had hit the page, and then a few more projects. So what we found, and what was great about doing this with moderated testing, was that we didn't have to build out every possible path. So we started with basically this page, and then depending on what the participant wanted to do, I would actually bring them to that section of the site and have them explore to see at what point they felt comfortable finding a project and looking into making a donation. And of course, what was most interesting was this most urgent project area, and so I allowed participants to, I would actually bring them to some of the most urgent projects and have them click around there. They were also very interested in projects that were close to their location. And what was also great about this session was many people wanted to know more about us. So they would actually go to the About Us section. And we had on our list of pages to redesign, that section was next, or pretty soon after. So I was actually able to get feedback not only on our homepage design, but then also about the current version of our About Us section, which we then later used to redesign that section. So in the end, we ended up actually removing some of the quotes from Colbert and Oprah, because we found that wasn't that useful. We then brought some of the information from the About section to the home page because people were looking for that right away. And so that's this 2 sentences here. We also, here's another area where we added some of the language from our About section, and we actually had created a link to be able to go there. We heard that people wanted to see more about our transparency, and so we brought that section here. And yeah, and I think that's pretty much it. Okay. Yeah, so I think after doing some unmoderated and moderated testing, what we do now is actually all moderated testing. And we found that it's generally more efficient, and in cases where it's a small feature, we'll actually add other questions and maybe even combine different features in one session. So I think that's it for my section. Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about recruiting.
Great. All right. Just going to share my screen here.